Rome and Nubia, The Forgotten War, Part 1, Introduction. Egypt lies in ruins. Alexandria has fallen, and thousands of Roman sandals now walk the banks of the Nile, consolidating the gains of Caesar Augustus. Egypt, as it had been known for thousands of years, was no more. Cleopatra Philopatra VII lies dead, killed by her own hand in an effort to spite her enemies and deprive them of their trophy. Another queen beyond the southern border looks north at the smoldering ashes of her nation's longtime rivals and sighs deeply. The winds of war were blowing south, and the all-consuming beast that was Roman imperial ambition set its sights on the gold, ivory, and other coveted goods that streamed north from this ancient empire. Kush, however, and their warrior queen Amanirenas were not interested in submitting to foreign rule. The drums of war would soon beat in the hearts of Nubia's warriors. The only question was when. What we are talking about is the almost forgotten war between Rome and Nubia that immediately followed the fall of Cleopatra's Egypt, which was the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty, and it finally closed the book on Egypt's ancient civilization as it had been known for thousands of years. Unfortunately, the sources that we have on the events that took place following the fall of Egypt are not Nubian. This is not for the lack of written sources, but more so due to the fact that the language of the Kushites is lost to us. Meroitic, as it is now called, used many of the same character letters found in the various scripts used by the Egyptians, and even their languages, both being Afro-Asiatic, were similar. However, we have yet to uncover a Rosetta Stone that will crack the code for all of us and tell us about the lies of the Kushites in their own words. For now, we have accounts of the war from Strabo, which detail the conflict as well as the artifacts found in Meroe, the old capital of the Kingdom of Kush. End of Part 1. Rome and Nubia, The Forgotten War, Part 2, Background and Politics. In order to properly understand what led to this conflict, we have to start several years earlier with the death of Julius Caesar and the subsequent fallout. Julius Caesar was crowned Emperor of Rome and was killed on March 15th, 44 BCE on the steps of the Roman Senate by high-ranking members of the Roman elite. This included Marcus Junius Brutus, Cassius Longinus, and Decimus Brutus. This led to a crisis of leadership as there was no clear plan to follow up after the assassination, and Julius Caesar still had powerful supporters, among them being Mark Antony, who was a powerful politician and military commander, Cleopatra, his former lover and the Queen of Egypt, and Octavian, his heir, grandnephew, and adopted son, who was a young but emerging political leader. After much political wrangling, the dust had finally settled, and Octavian, later called Caesar Augustus, renamed in 27 BCE, took over rule of the Roman Empire. He still had to contend, however, with Mark Antony, who used his political clout to make Caesar Augustus's rule difficult. Mark Antony made claims to leadership of regions like Cisalpine Gaul, and even tried to rouse the Roman public against Caesar Octavian in open rebellion. In the end, they settled on making peace by dividing the empire into a new triumvirate. Rule of the empire was to be divided between Caesar Augustus, who controlled Gaul, Hispania, and the Alps, Mark Antony, who controlled Greece, Anatolia, Cyrene, and Asia Minor, and Lepidus, who controlled the provinces of Africa. All other areas were ruled collectively by the triumvirate. Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt, saw this chaos as an opportunity to break from Rome and seek full autonomy. While Egypt was not officially considered part of the Roman Empire, it was a lucrative client state, a legacy passed down to Cleopatra by way of debts incurred by her predecessors. Control of Egypt meant access to grain, papyrus production, and luxury goods hotly desired by the Roman elite. This included pelts, precious gems, and the like from kingdoms south of Egypt, like Kush and the city-states of Punt, access to trade goods like silk imported from as far as India that came in by sea, and many other goods that were not easily accessible or produced in the Mediterranean. Using the wealth produced by Egypt, Cleopatra helped to fund some of Mark Antony's military campaigns against the will of the other two-thirds of the triumvirate. Eventually, she and Mark Antony, through their close political relationship, eventually became lovers. And then they married, after, of course, Antony's divorce to his Roman wife. After a series of offenses by the couple, some real and others imagined, against the Senate and the spirit of Rome, Octavian declared the final war of the Roman Republic. While much of this war did take place in Egypt, it was less a war against Egypt and more so a war between Octavian and Mark Antony. After the Roman victories at Actium and finally the Battle of Alexandria in 30 BCE, Egypt was declared a Roman province. This shifted the balance of power in the region. Egypt had long been a buffer state and trade zone between Kush and the Roman Empire. Now that their longtime rival had fallen for the last time, never to rise again, Queen Amanirenas had work to do. The Kushites, throughout their history, were famed for the quality of soldiers that they produced. For millennia, mercenaries from Kush were found in depictions fighting in the armies of the pharaohs. Many of them had risen to high ranks in the Egyptian army, and they even ruled Egypt during the 26th dynasty. The soldiers that they produced were well respected for their size, strength, and skill with the bow. This tradition of skilled archery carried on into the Islamic conquest, where al-Baduri referred to them as the pupil smiters for their uncanny ability to successfully target the eyes of their enemies with their bows from a significant distance. But that, however, is a story for another time. Their queen, Amanirenas, her full title in Meroitic being Amanirse Kore Likidwe Li, meaning Amanirenas, queen, and Kandaka, ruled Kush from 40 BCE until her death in 10 BCE. Because we are as yet unable to translate Meroitic script beyond the names of people and places, there is much that is unknown about her early life. What she is most famous for, however, is leading her armies from the front against a Roman invasion in a bloody 5-year war, and emerging victorious. End of Part 2. Rome and Nubia, the Forgotten War. Part 3. The War. The war between Rome and Nubia did not immediately follow the fall of Egypt. Initially, there was a peace deal struck in which Rome promised not to invade Kush so long as they paid tribute. Queen Amanirenas begrudgingly signed this agreement, not wanting to plunge her nation into war. Despite Kush's reputation for producing some of the finest warriors of their time, Rome was still far larger, and regardless of which way a war went, it would be costly. Unrest grew in the Roman province of Egypt, specifically in Thebes, as Rome increased taxes to pay for the expenses incurred fighting Mark Antony, and also to fund military expeditions into Arabia. Despite its agreement with Kush, Rome expressed interest in annexing the Kushite territory of Wadi al-Aki in order to access the gold mines of the region. Tensions were further exacerbated by the Romans imposing taxes on Lower Nubia, which was also in contravention to the treaty. The saber-rattling began, and the Nubians, as a show of strength in response to the Roman breaches to the treaty, started to send raiding parties across the Egyptian border. In one account of the war, it was said that Queen Amanirenas sent a bundle of golden arrows to Caesar Augustus, saying that he could accept them as a token of friendship, and if he still chose to go to war, that he could keep them, because he was going to need them. The raids and passive-aggressive threats of violence would not deter Octavian's resolve to take Nubia. Only blood, iron, and fields of human carrion could change that. Early on in the preliminary border conflicts, her husband, King Tetricus, was killed on the battlefield, leaving Queen Amanirenas and her son, Prince Akinidad, to lead the armies. In 27 BCE, early on in the war, the Kushites had made great advances, going as far north as Thebes and Cyrene, sacking the cities and taking untold numbers of Roman soldiers as prisoners. Most famously, they pulled down statues of Caesar Augustus, keeping the head of one of these statues as a prize to be buried under the queen's throne as a sign of her power and as a sign of disrespect to Caesar Augustus. The head was found in the 19th century during an excavation of the ruins of Meroe, buried under the foot of the queen's throne. In response, Rome sent thousands of reinforcements led by General Aelius Petronius, and initially tried to set terms with Amanirenas at Daca. The terms of peace were not accepted, and the war continued. The Roman army pressed into northern Kush, and then besieged the city of Napata. Amid the flames, gladius and battle-axe crossed. Thundering horses came against trumpeting war elephants. Spears, pilums, and arrows fell from the sky in every direction. The ancient temples of the religious capital of the Kingdom of Kush were burned to ashes, and among those laid low was the queen's own son, Prince Akinidad. From Napata, the Roman army marched on Meroe, meeting stiff resistance from the Kushite forces stationed at the fortresses between the two cities. The march towards the Kushite capital was not completed, and the Roman army had to pull back into less hostile territory and set up an encampment at Qasr Ibrim. In typical Roman fashion, Petronius had the camp well defended, with quickly built fortifications and well-positioned ballistae, making assault on that position on top of the hill he was stationed a near-suicide mission. That being said, Queen Amanirenas had so arrayed her army of many thousands of men in such a way that further advance from the Roman army would not be possible. And so the stalemate ensued. End of Part 3. Rome and Nubia, the Forgotten War, Part 4, Conclusion. Wanting this foreign army out of her lands more than anything else, the queen sent envoys to Petronius, who then forwarded them to Caesar Augustus. In 22 BCE, an agreement was struck on the island of Samos between Rome and Kush. Kush would pay to Rome what tributes were owed before the war, and pay compensation for sacking the towns of Upper Egypt. In exchange, Rome returned all of the Kushite land that was captured during the conflict, and trade relations were re-established. Kush would remain fully independent and was no longer required to pay tribute to Rome in exchange for its sovereignty. Relations would remain largely peaceful between the two nations, and Kush used the wealth it gained through its trade relationship with Rome to rebuild the city of Napata, and remained an important political player in the region until it eventually disappeared in the 4th century, its capital abandoned and rule over the reign taken up by the expansion of Aksum under the Christian king Ezana. End of Part 4. The content for this video was provided by the Historical African Martial Arts Association. Visit us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or on YouTube. Also, you can join our group on Facebook.